To become a more articulate speaker, the first thing to understand is that speaking is thinking out loud. Now, this means that with every word you say, your listener is judging how intelligent you are and whether or not your thoughts are actually worth listening to. So if it feels like you're smarter than you sound, but people's eyes kind of glaze over whenever you try to turn those thoughts into words, we're going to fix that right now. I've been studying this stuff for over 15 years, and I've distilled the skill of articulate speaking down to 5 core principles, starting with perhaps the most important one, which is the rhythm of your voice. I see rhythm as the underlying music of your voice. This is the tone and tempo and dynamics that either make your voice easy and pleasing to listen to or dull and boring. And so as you find your own unique rhythm, the first thing to lock in is the speed or tempo that you're speaking at. And it's not necessarily about speaking faster or slower per se. That's going to be different for everybody. It's about speaking at a rate that your mind can keep pace with your words. If you think about running with your head way out over your feet, you're naturally going to trip and fall, right? The same thing happens all the time verbally. So if you find yourself stumbling over your words or rambling or searching for what you're trying to say as you're saying it, that's a sign that your words are moving too fast for your mind to keep up with. So in many cases, if you simply slow down, you'll immediately become more articulate. And again, as I said, your unique tempo is unique to you. So what works for you may not work for somebody else. It's about finding your own rhythm. And once you've done that, the next thing to add are the dynamics. This is the variation in the speed and emphasis that you place on your words and statements. And so as an example here, if I said to you, when everything's delivered at the same speed and the same tone, nothing stands out. How did that land? Probably not very well. If I say it like this though, when everything's delivered at the same speed in the same tone, nothing stands out. Very different, hopefully. So the rule here is that whenever you're trying to make a point, you slow down and you add emphasis, as I'm doing right now. When you are adding context around the point, you can speak a little bit faster. You can reserve emphasis for later on when you're trying to make the point, as I'm doing right now. But again, as soon as it's time to make a point, you slow down and add emphasis. This will add dynamics to your rhythm. And once you've done that, finally, something that's way underused is the pause. This is something the best speakers in the world all do. What weak communicators do is they rush in to fill all the spaces in between their words, like they're trying to hold their listener on a leash. Please listen to me. The best communicators, though, they step back and they use the space to establish their authority. There's this incredible clip of Steve Jobs speaking at MIT where a student asks him a question. And again, instead of rushing to answer as many speakers would, he just paused. And he kept on pausing for 18 seconds, if you can believe that. I'm not telling you to pause for 18 seconds. In most cases, that would be awkward. But in this case, the longer he paused for, the more everyone in the room leaned in and the greater the tension in the room was. So that when he finally answered, all of that tension would be relieved. The way I look at this is silence is what creates tension, and tension is what holds attention. So you have probably seen this in classical music in a crescendo, right? Where music is building to this apex point, and then it goes silent. In that silence, tension is built that's then finally released when the music comes crashing back in. So this is what incredible world-class speakers all do. They use pauses to add emphasis to whatever they're going to say after the pause. And going back to that music analogy, I see the speed and tempo of your voice as the tempo, the dynamics of your voice as the melody, and the pauses like the bass drop. Okay, when you bring these 3 things together and you hone in on what your unique rhythm is, again, your speech starts to sound like music. However, as a bonus point, there's something that blocks this, that stops rhythm. And that is, believe it or not, your physical body. Okay? The bonus point here is that when you're speaking, relax your physical body because tension is what chokes rhythm. If you ever feel like your voice feels thin and strained, if you're struggling to get your words out, like they're struggling to leave your throat, all you need to do is not try to think your way out of that tension, out of that nervousness, simply relax. Relax your throat, relax your chest, relax your belly, and immediately your voice will be clearer and deeper, and you will articulate your thoughts that much more clearly. I see tension sometimes like the bindings that restrict self-expression. So again, the rule is not to think your way out of that nervous tension, but literally to relax your physical body, and the rhythm of your voice will be that much more pleasing to listen to. Second, the next principle is to say less. So this is a big one. The best communicators aren't the ones who are speaking the most. They're the ones who deliver the most value per word. What we're looking for is density of value. You could see over-communicating, like watering down the potency of the message that you're trying to get across. And there's a few really common ways we do this. The most obvious one is with filler words, right? Like, like, you know, honestly, literally. I see these as like litter in a street. A little bit of litter is okay. You know, if you were to go to a country and the streets were just completely spotless, it would almost feel a little bit creepy, right? Unnatural. Well, a little bit of filler in your voice allows you to feel human. However, if your speech is just littered with filler, it's going to destroy the clarity of what you're saying. So our goal is to put your speaking through a strainer, clear away most of that filler. And the trick here is that anytime you find yourself impulsively about to say or like, just pause. Just pause. That will immediately improve your articulacy. But there's one worse type of filler. The filler words are very common. There's another one that's even more damaging, and I call this verbal hedging. So when you add to your speech terms like I guess, kind of, if that makes sense, I would say, you've heard many of these, right? These signal uncertainty and even a subtle insecurity with what you're saying. So for example, if I say to you, I guess we need to focus on profit instead of revenue, if that makes sense. How confident does that sound? Rather than just saying, we need to focus on profit over revenue. Much clearer, right? If I say, you know, I would say we just need to try to execute faster. How confident do I sound? On the other hand, if I say, we need to execute faster, again, it's much clearer. So anytime you're hedging and you're trying to insulate yourself against any type of defensiveness or criticism, remember, the hedging actually causes the listener to be more uncertain in what you're saying. So our goal is to remove some of the filler, not all of it. A little bit makes you natural and human. And then anytime you're hedging verbally, remove that as well. Again, put your speaking through a strainer. I love that famous story of the Pope asking Michelangelo how he created the statue, the David. And Michelangelo said, it was easy. I just removed everything that was not David. So we're doing the same thing with our speech. We're removing everything that's not meant to be there so that the polished diamond of our message is all we get across to the listener. That's the goal. Third, use simple, clear language. There's a $1 billion direct response marketing company in the financial market called Agora, who analyzed all of their biggest winning sales letters of all time. Some have done tens of millions of dollars in sales over the years. And they couldn't find any commonalities between them, not in the headline structure or the length of the sales letter or the actual structure of the arguments. The only common trait between all of them was that they were written at a third grade level, meaning a third grader could understand them. Contrast that with the way that lawyers write legal documents. They put all this complicated terminology in them so nobody can understand what they're saying except for lawyers. So your speech is the exact same way. If you're using vague generalities, it's not clicking in the listener's mind clearly. So as an example, if I say to you, let's circle back when we have bandwidth, how clear is that? Versus if I say, let's talk on Tuesday at 3 p.m. One is very clear, very precise, very obvious. The other one is very ambiguous. As another example, do you see any potential synergies? I'm filling this with buzzwords on purpose. Versus, do you want to work together on this project? Again, much clearer, right? However, this also happens all the time in our everyday language. It doesn't have to be full of buzzwords. So if you ask me, for example, how are you feeling? And I say, good. What does that tell you? Not a lot, right? If you ask me how I'm feeling and I say, I'm feeling really inspired by this project we're doing right now. I'm feeling really inspired to give this talk to you. It gives you a lot more information. If you ask, how's the business going? And I say, we're making progress. Doesn't tell you much. If I say sales are up 40% this quarter, it tells you a lot more. Finally, if you say our landing page isn't working well versus our landing page loads in 8 seconds instead of 2, it says a lot more. So the goal is to use clear, simple language and be clear about what you're actually saying. I face this all the time when I'm coaching entrepreneurs. I can't give advice properly unless they communicate precisely to me and tell me exactly what's going on. Sometimes I need to push and say, no, clarify exactly what that means. If you say sales are up, how much are they up by? If you say our funnel's not working, what part of the funnel is broken specifically? Be clear and precise with your language. And I look at this as a blade that cuts through the noise of the listener's mind. If you're using a dull blade, all of these vague ambiguities, it's not going to cut through. You want a sharp, precise tool. So the point that needs to be made clear here is that being articulate is not about using the fanciest words and sentences. It's not. It's about how clearly and easily your words land in the listener's mind. So again, simple, clear, precise language. And now getting to the really fun stuff. This is where we upgrade the specific words that you use. So as an analogy, I like to view words as electricity and the listener's mind as a light bulb. We want to use higher voltage language when we're speaking. And so the fourth principle here is to remove dead words and phrases from our vocabulary. These are words and terms that are so commonly used, they've lost their voltage. They've been drained of all their meaning. And when we use them, the listener immediately says, oh, I've heard that before, and their mind shuts off. The light dims in their mind. So as an example, words like authenticity, mindset, alignment, purpose, impact, abundance. These are all very commonly used words that mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And if it could mean 10 different things to 10 different people, most commonly it means nothing. So we want to remove these words from our lexicon and use more precise, accurate words whenever possible. And also do this with our phrases. There are many phrases that have been so overused in society, they've lost all of their meaning and their potency. So for example, the phrase 10x, you've probably heard many times, game changer, level up, create massive value, think outside the box, in a nutshell, best thing since sliced bread. I'm laughing because I got a story about this. I was in the middle of a breakup with a girlfriend many years ago, and there was a guy who was interested in her. And so as we're breaking up, she said to me, you know, if we're not going to be together, I'm going to be with him because he, quote, thinks I'm the best thing since sliced bread. And I remember thinking to myself, I wasn't even angry about the guy. I was just put off that she had used the term best thing since sliced bread. It just sounded so corny to me. And so if you're using these overused phrases in your communication, whether it's marketing, content, talking to your team, even speaking with your friends and family, a little bit of the light is dimming in their mind because they've heard it before. So again, remove dead words and phrases from your lexicon entirely is the goal. And what we replace them with is what I call power words and phrases. So this is principle number 5, and I'll warn you, these are the seasoning, not the steak. You want to use these somewhat sparingly, but a little bit goes a long way. So these are high voltage words and phrases. And I had ChatGPT for this talk run an analysis on 2 years of my email newsletters that I've written. And it came up with some of the most commonly used power words and phrases that I like to use. So for me, a few examples of these words are formidable, surgical, vicious, precision, craftsmanship, blazing, virtuoso, masterful, firestorm, and savage. So notice the energy that these words carry. They're high voltage words. And of course, if I use them constantly, it would be way too much, but a little bit matters a lot. So On the other side, examples of phrases that I often use: boots on the ground, tip of the spear, kill shot, precision tool, razor sharp, target locked. And again, these are mine. They reflect my style, my personality. What you're looking to do is develop your own verbal aesthetic, your own style of speaking. And this is something that happens over time. So when I was first learning speech and communication, and especially writing, I actually carried a moleskin notebook around with me. And anytime I would come across a turn of phrase or a word that I particularly liked, I would just write it down in my moleskin notebook. And I would, over time, collect this vocabulary of power words and power phrases that would then be used in my communication. And so I highly recommend this practice. If you have even in a Notion document, your Apple Notes, or just an old school moleskin notebook, and simply write down the words and phrases that resonate with you, that land for you, you will naturally find yourself using them more in your communication, and it'll be that much more powerful. So if you combine these 5 principles of finding your natural rhythm of your speech, saying less, filtering your excesses, using clear, precise language, avoiding dead words and phrases, and then adding power words and phrases, you will be a powerhouse communicator, and people won't be able to help but listen to you when you speak. However, I know that's a lot to remember. At this stage, there's a little bit of overwhelm, probably. How do I hold all of this in my head when I'm speaking? And if I do, won't I be stifled when I'm talking? And the answer is yes. That's a big risk when you're learning this skill. And it is a skill. You develop this over time. However, I love this quote from the musician Maggie Rogers that says, "Writer's block is just editing yourself while you write." And speaking is the same way. If you're constantly thinking about, oh, what's the perfect way to say this? What's that power word that I wanted to insert here? And oh my God, I just used a filler word. You're naturally going to stifle yourself and kill the power of your communication. So the framework I use for this is practice versus games. As an athlete in practice, you're going to meticulously drill every last part of each of your moves and your plays. You're going to focus on your footwork and angles and really hone in on all of the little details. But when you get out into a game, you just play. So if we want to master this skill of articulate speaking and actually be able to do it in real time when it matters, then we have to separate the practice from the games. Practice is any time you're not actively speaking. And during this time, your inputs will equal your outputs when you do speak. So what I mean by that is the sum total of what you put into your mind will form the sort of source code for the language that comes out when you speak. What most people are doing is taking in a whole bunch of generally low quality social media content and having half-baked conversations with friends and family. That's not very good source code. So elite level communicators are constantly studying other high level communicators. So whoever has a style of communication that really grips you, that you really resonate with, study them. Take in a lot of their content, a lot of their communication. If there are writers that write in a style that, again, really resonates with you, read a lot of their writing. For me, Hunter S. Thompson was a huge influence. Jed McKenna was another big influence as a writer. I used to watch the show Californication, the character Hank Moody. He's an incredible communicator. I watched that show through, I don't even know how many times over the years. I would watch Russell Brand. I would watch Dave Chappelle do stand-up comedy. Craig Ferguson is another one. These are just some of my favorites. But whoever has a style that you really resonate with, consume a lot of their stuff. And then anytime you notice a turn of phrase or a way of wording something, or even just a particular word that you really like, write it down. This way, you're downloading quality source code, so to speak, that will then come out naturally when you speak. And keep in mind, this is a process. It's a skill that builds up over time. So you want to be doing this for the rest of your life, ideally. It's one of the most valuable skills you'll ever develop. On the other hand, when you get into a game, just play. There's this beautiful quote from the jazz musician Charlie Parker that goes, "First you learn the instrument, then you learn the music, then you forget all that shit and just play." Same goes for speaking. So I hope this talk has given you the tools you need to master this skill of articulate speaking. But there's one more skill that all of the greatest communicators have in common, and that is the skill of thinking. As we said earlier, Speaking is just thinking out loud. And so the quality of your thoughts will determine the quality of your communication when you actually express them. So we have a video on this channel called How to Master the Skill of Thinking. This will help you develop truly original thoughts that are worth listening to. I'll put it in the end card of this video, and I'll put a link in the description as well. Check that out next, and I'll see you over there.